Welcome to Chapter 3. This is an exciting day because we are now starting the heart of algebra. So we're solving linear equations. So this is just the introduction. Do not skip this because this will give you a general procedure for solving any linear equation. So first of all, we got to talk about how do we know what is an equation? How do you recognize an equation? So when I ask students that, they say, well, it's got an equal sign, which is true. We've got an equal sign. But there's more to it, because if you had 2x plus 3x, well, that's not yet an equation. Students will say, well, then you have to have the answer on the other side. And, well, yeah, but if you write the answer, which we would just simplify that as 5x, this is not really this is an equation, but it's not the kind of equation that we want to solve for. Because in this particular case, this x, do you remember when we talked about the roles of variables? In this particular case, x stands for any number. And we don't want to have an equation like that because there's nothing to solve there. There's nothing to find out what x equals because x can equal anything. So I'm going to erase this second side and just tell you what an equation looks like. Let's say we have 10. What makes this an equation is that you have, yes, an equal sign, and you also have two sides. And the idea of an equation then is to find that one particular number, in this case it's represented by x, but that one particular number that makes this equation true. So what do we do with an equation? Well, we solve it, meaning what's x? What's the only number that x can equal? And what does our final step look like? Well, if the equation is in x, your final equation will look like x equals some number. And in this particular case, it would equal 2. That's the only thing that would work in this original equation that would make that true. Okay, so another thing that we need to cover is we're going, okay, now that we have a better idea of what equations are, let's take a look at a linear equation versus a quadratic equation. There are other types of equations, but in this particular class, we're only going to be looking at linear equations, which will be in Chapter 3. And then later in the year, in Chapter 7, we'll be taking a look at quadratic equations. So if we take a look at the two examples I have here of linear equations on the left, you'll see what makes the difference here between these look a lot alike, right? So on the left we have a linear equation and on the right we have a quadratic equation. What's the only difference that you see? Yeah, we have over here in the quadratic we have an exponent on the x. So it's squared. So the exponent is 2, and in a linear equation, we don't see an exponent, so we know the exponent is an implied 1. Same down here, and this one I'm going, well, wait a second, all I see are x's. But if you multiply this out, quadratic equations can come a little bit disguised. You would get 6x squared minus 9x, blah, 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 blah. So there's where our exponent of 2 comes from. So again, a linear equation is when the x's they don't have you don't see an exponent, but the exponent, the implied exponent, is 1. So we'll take a look at, there are basically 3 steps to solving a linear equation. The idea is you want to get x or whatever variable the equation is in, you want to get that x naked and alone. So what we mean by that is, you'll see here in this first x equals, we've already decided that's what our final step is going to look like. When we know what number x equals, then we've solved it. But check this out. Saying x equals something is really just saying you've got 1x plus 0 plus nothing. Okay? So keep that in mind. We want to get plus 0 because once we get plus 0, we don't have to say that. And we want to get 1x because we know that 1x is another way of writing x. Okay, here are the 3 basic steps, but I want to point out here that you may not have to do every step. So briefly, the first step is you look at each side of the equation separately. If you can do anything to clean up or simplify each side separately, do so. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't, but you always check that first. The next step is to get all of your variable terms. Remember what variable terms look like? They may look like 2x, negative 3/5 x, and so forth. If a term has an x or another variable in it, then that's a variable term. And you want to get all of the variable terms on one side of your equation, and you want to get all of the constant terms, 2, negative 3/5, just our regular little numbers, on the opposite side. And then in the third step, you want to get x naked. In other words, there's no 2x, there's no 2 in front of the x, there's no negative 3/5 in front of the x. And I'm going to emphasize here, and please keep this in mind. In step 2, the operations that you're going to be using are addition and subtraction. So when you want to move whole terms, you add or subtract them. And then finally, in step 3, to get that x all by itself, naked, nothing in front, you will use the operations multiplication and division. And that's it.